La Morte d'Arthur is a reworking of traditional tales by Sir Thomas Malory about the legendary King Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, Merlin and the Knights of the Round Table. Malory interprets existing French and English stories about these figures and adds original material. La Morte d'Arthur was first published in 1485 by William Caxton and is today perhaps the best-known work of Arthurian literature in English. Many modern Arthurian writers have used Malory as the principal source, including T.H. White in his popular The Once and Future King and Tennyson in the Idylls of the King. Authorship. The exact identity of the author of La Morte d'Arthur has long been the subject of speculation, owing to the fact that a number of minor historical figures bore the name of Sir Thomas Malory, but scholarship has increasingly supported the notion that the author was the Thomas Malory who was born between the years 1400 to 1410 to Sir John Malory of Newbold Revel, Warwickshire. Sir Thomas inherited the family estate in 1434 after his father died and is believed to have engaged in a life of crime punctuated with long periods of imprisonment. As early as 1433, he was seemingly indicted for theft and, in 1450, it was alleged that he was involved in attempted murder, robbery, rape, and extortion stemming from a cattle raid. He was imprisoned in Coleshill but escaped and soon after robbed the Cistercian monastery. Malory was once again arrested in 1454, but 2 years later he was released through a royal pardon. Despite these reports, overall details are sparse on Malory as a historical figure, with constabulary reports and records of his criminal affiliations making up much of the historical record. Although there are also some reports of a more legitimate military career, he may have served in France in the later stages of the 100 Years' War, and of various public office positions, including that of a Member of Parliament. His exact date of birth and early years are obscure, and his name does not enter clear historical record until 1439, though it is known that he was knighted by 1441. Malory was arrested for the last time in 1460 and interned at Newgate Prison, where he may have written La Morte d'Arthur and other works of an Arthurian nature, completing La Morte at some point during 1469 to 70. The mismatch of Malory's life and the ideals of chivalry presented in his work has led to attempts to find a better-suited candidate for its authorship, but no others have attracted nearly as much academic support as the claim for Sir Thomas of Newbold Revel. Sir Thomas Malory died in prison on the 14th of March 1471, with La Morte d'Arthur published posthumously by William Caxton on the 31st of July 1485. Publication history. Elizabeth Bryan speaks of Malory's contribution to Arthurian legend in her introduction to La Morte d'Arthur. Malory did not invent the stories in this collection, he translated and compiled them. Malory in fact translated Arthurian stories that already existed in 13th-century French prose and compiled them together with at least one tale from Middle English sources to create this text. He called the full work the whole book of King Arthur and amp of his noble knights of the Round Table, but Caxton instead titled it with Malory's name for the final section of the cycle. Modernized editions update the late Middle English spelling, update some pronouns, and repunctuate and reparagraph the text. Others furthermore update the phrasing and vocabulary to contemporary modern English. Here is an example in Middle English and then in modern English. Do after the good and leave the evil, and it shall bring you to good fame and renown. Do after the good and leave the evil, and it shall bring you to good fame and renown. The Middle English of Le Morte d'Arthur is much closer to early modern English than the Middle English of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. If the spelling is modernized, it reads almost like Elizabethan English. The first printing of Malory's work was made by Caxton in 1485. Only 2 copies of this original printing are known to exist, in the collections of the Morgan Library in Amp Museum and the John Rylands Library. It proved popular and was reprinted in 1498 and 1529, with some additions and changes by Wynkyn de Worde, who succeeded Caxton's press. 3 more editions were published before the English Civil War: William Copeland's, Thomas East's, and William Stansby's, each of which contained additional changes and errors. Thereafter, the book went out of fashion until the Romantic revival of interest in all things medieval. The year 1816 saw a new edition by Walker and Edwards, and another one by Wilkes, both based on the 1634 Stansby edition. Davison's 1817 edition was promoted by Robert Southey and was based on Caxton's 1485 edition, or on a mixture of Caxton and Stansby. Davison was the basis for subsequent editions until the discovery of the Winchester Manuscript. Caxton separated Malory's 8 books into 21 books, subdivided each book into a total of 507 chapters, added a summary of each chapter and added a colophon to the entire book. Malory's 8 tales are The Birth and Rise of Arthur, For the Marriage of King Uther unto King Arthur that reigned after him and did many battles, King Arthur's War against the Romans, The Noble Tale between King Arthur and Lucius the Emperor of Rome, The Book of Lancelot, The Tale of Sir Lancelot du Lac, The Book of Gareth, The Tale of Sir Gareth, Tristan and Isolde, The Book of Sir Tristram de Lyons, The Quest for the Holy Grail, The Noble Tale of the Sangreal, The Affair between Lancelot and Guinevere, Sir Lancelot and Queen Guinevere, The Breaking of the Knights of the Round Table and the Death of Arthur, Le Morte d'Arthur. Most of the events in the book take place in Britain and France at an unspecified time. In some parts, the story ventures farther afield to Rome and Saris, and recalls biblical tales from the ancient Near East. The Winchester Manuscript. Winchester College headmaster W. F. Oakeshott discovered a previously unknown manuscript copy of the work in June 1934, during the cataloguing of the college's library. Newspaper accounts announced that what Caxton had published in 1485 was not exactly what Malory had written. Oakeshott published the finding of the manuscript in 1963, chronicling the initial event and his realization that this indeed was Malory, with startling evidence of revision in the Caxton edition. It is hypothesized that Caxton's text and the Winchester manuscript are both derived from an earlier copy. The Winchester manuscript is believed to be closer on the whole to Malory's original. In addition, it does not have the book and chapter divisions for which Caxton takes credit in his preface. Malory scholar Eugene Guinevere examined the manuscript shortly after its discovery. Oakeshott was encouraged to produce an edition himself, but he ceded the project to Guinevere. Based on his initial study of the manuscript, Oakeshott concluded in 1935 that the copy from which Caxton printed his edition was already subdivided into books and sections. Quote, Guinevere made an exhaustive comparison of the manuscript with Caxton's edition and reached similar conclusions. In his 1947 publication of the works of Sir Thomas Malory, he argued that Malory did not write a single book, but rather a series of Arthurian tales, each of which is an internally consistent and independent work. However, scholars pointed out that Malory's later tales make frequent references back to the earlier events, suggesting that he had wanted the tales to cohere better but had not sufficiently revised the whole text to achieve this. The Winchester Manuscript has been digitized by a Japanese team who note that the text is imperfect, as the manuscript lacks the first and last quires and few leaves. The most striking feature of the manuscript is the extensive use of red ink, style and themes of Le Morte d'Arthur. The publication of Chaucer's work by William Caxton was a precursor to his publication of Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, where the Canterbury Tales are in Middle English. Malory extends one hand to Chaucer, and one to Spenser, constructing a manuscript which is hard to place in one category. Like other English prose in the 15th century, Le Morte d'Arthur was highly influenced by French writings, but Malory blends these with other English verse and prose forms. Although Malory harkens back to an age of idealized knighthood, jousting tournaments, and grand castles to suggest a medieval world, his stories lack any agricultural life or commerce, which makes the story feel as if it were an era of its own. Because there is so much lengthy ground to cover, Malory uses so and then are often to transition his retelling. This repetition is not redundant, but adds an air of continuity only befitting the story's scale and grandeur. The stories then become episodes instead of instances that can stand on their own. There is an artful way in which Malory portrays Arthur by revealing him to us only by how others are affected by his actions. This creates a man whom we cannot define, but still stands as the center of the legend, and lets our mind move from him to the scenes around him. The themes of love and war are fundamental to the work of Sir Thomas Malory. Religion, the third of the great epic themes, is admittedly and nobly subordinated only at the end. Guinevere, in expiation of her guilt in destroying the Round Table, becomes a nun, and Lancelot, for love of her and not for the love of God, takes on himself the habit of perfection. Quote, "It has been declared that Malory recreated an epic story from romance, because of his inclusion of the mysterious and magical elements in a depiction of a world with which Malory's contemporaries are familiar. Through the format of a knightly romance provides an idealized version of the life of the knightly class. It is the warrior's daydream, designed for recreation, not instruction, and representing the average sensual man's point of view." Quote, "The forms of romantic characters used in order to create the world of Arthur and the Round Table consist almost entirely of fighting men. The wives are mistresses, with an occasional clerk or an enchanter, a fairy or a fiend, a giant or a dwarf, and time does not work on the heroes of Malory.